The taxi jolts as blue lights smear across the windows, while the driver's whisper cuts colder than the sirens. I keep my hands still on my lap, fingers curled tight against my jeans, as if any movement might trigger whatever is spiraling outside this cab. The present feels stretched thin, like the air has become a membrane that can tear at any second. My throat locks when the taxi slows and the phone screen glare flickers sharply across the dashboard, catching the corner of the driver's eye in a quick, nervous reflection. I don't know him not beyond a nod and the usual question of destination, yet he looks at me like he expects something from me. Some reaction, some decision, something I don't have the tools or knowledge to give. Outside the city seems to tilt. The blue lights aren't just passing by or belonging to a distant patrol car. They're converging, moving in lines that feel too coordinated to be coincidence. My pulse beats in my ears muffled as silhouettes tighten around us. The driver's knuckles whiten around the steering wheel. He whispers again, lower this time, telling me not to move, not to speak, not to breathe too loudly. His voice wavers like he's forcing calm over panic. I don't recognize the authority in his tone, as if he suddenly knows more about this moment than I do. His breathing changes shallow and rigid. My chest tightens in response, instincts screaming at me to run, even though there's nowhere to go, not with officers flanking the sides and positioning themselves with tactical certainty. Their weapons aren't raised, but the potential feels thick in the air, the implied threat of readiness. I see the driver's phone flicker again, vibrating against the mount. A message tries to push through, lighting his face in stuttering pulses. He ignores it entirely, jaw locked. My heart sinks when he lifts his chin slightly, watching the left mirror with an intensity that makes me press deeper into the seat. It's like he's waiting for a cue, or recognizing a pattern that's unfolding outside. The lights multiply in the mirror's curved surface, spreading across the street like an invasion of fractured color. Shadows flicker across the pavement as boots hit the ground. Someone shouts an order sharp enough to slice the moment open, but I can't make out the words, only the tone urgent, no hesitation. The driver mutters something under his breath, a single phrase I don't catch, but the tone carries fear, like it's a physical weight. I shift slightly, barely an inch, trying to see if I can understand what's happening, and the driver snaps his gaze toward me with a warning that chills the space between us. "Do not move," he breathes, voice trembling under the weight of something unspoken. His eyes flick to the windshield again. The phone's pale glare flashes across his jawline as another message comes in, giving his skin a cold, artificial glow. My palms sweat despite my attempts to stay still. I listen to the silence between sirens, to the crunch of boots, to the rasp of someone's breath outside, as if they're bracing for something that hasn't happened yet, but will. More figures appear, crisp silhouettes in layered armor. Their movements are rehearsed, each step deliberate, each angle calculated. They fan out around the taxi until the windows reflect a dozen distorted versions of them. My lungs tighten, but I force myself not to inhale too sharply. The driver's whisper sits in my head like a command I can't disobey. I see one officer raise a hand signaling, and a beam of light cuts through the side window, landing across my knee. The reflection shifts with the heartbeat of the flashing lights shaking like a pulse outside my control. My mind struggles to catch up. Did the driver do something? Did I miss something during the ride? My thoughts are fragments scattered by adrenaline. The phone screen glare pulses again, brighter this time, as if pushing urgency into the space between us. The driver doesn't touch it. The air feels colder. My fingertips tingle. I can't see their faces clearly outside, just the disciplined motion of bodies and equipment, the shadows that stretch and retract with each flash of blue. Their silence is worse than shouting. The quiet coordination, the way they position themselves, sends a pressure creeping up my spine. They're surrounding us like they already decided something. I try to swallow, but my throat refuses. A voice booms from somewhere behind the glare and echoes against the cab. I still can't make out the exact command, but the tone hits hard, vibrating through the glass. Another officer moves closer, boots scraping pavement in harsh rhythm. The driver's fingers twitch on the wheel, as though he's fighting the urge to bolt, or surrender, or say too much. My heartbeat kicks harder when one officer leans in toward the passenger window, scanning the interior with a flashlight beam that slices across my chest. They look at us like the truth is already decided, I think the words forming with a bitter clarity I can't shake. The moment stretches further as the officers take their positions, as the driver's whisper threads through my thoughts again, as the phone screen glare pulses with unwelcome intensity. Then the gap between silence and action tightens until there's barely any space left. The next second feels like it's balancing on a blade edge, ready to fall in any direction. A shadow shifts outside, moving closer to the glass. Minnie Hook, the first command, finally breaks through the silence, about to change everything. I slid into the back seat of the taxi that evening, telling myself it would be a quiet ride home, though that certainty evaporated the moment the door clicked shut behind me and the bio stamp of who I was echoed sharply in my mind. I was Marcus Hale, 35 warehouse supervisor, just trying to get home before exhaustion made my thoughts too scattered to hold. The driver glanced at me through the mirror as if assessing something beyond my face, beyond my destination, and the faint glow from the overhead street lamp flickered across the metal clip of a clicking pen attached to his visor. I noticed the pen before anything else, the way it jittered with each small bump in the road, tapping a tiny staccato rhythm that felt out of place in the soft hum of the cab. My breath stutters like it's waiting for permission. I didn't understand why that line crossed my mind at the time, but it lodged itself beneath the tension of my ribs, dictating some unspoken caution. The driver asked me if I needed to be anywhere fast, his tone oddly formal for such a simple question. I told him no, and he nodded without smiling, fingers tightening slightly around the wheel. It wasn't unusual, I told myself. People had off days, drivers dealt with all sorts of stress. But the way he kept checking the mirrors suggested something heavier was pressing on him, something he wasn't sharing. The pen clicked once as he shifted lanes, an accidental movement maybe. Yet it sounded deliberate in the quiet. The city blurred past the window, neon reflections bending across the glass like warped lines of color. I tried to focus on the familiar rhythm of passing traffic, but my attention kept drifting back to the driver's shoulders, tense and angled, as if he expected someone to slam into us at any moment. He asked again if I was in a hurry. His voice held a strange weight, like he needed to confirm something about my timing, my schedule, my intentions. I hesitated to answer, a small uncertainty creeping into my chest. I gave him the same answer, trying to keep my voice steady. The clicking pen trembled a little as he accelerated. "You're sure no one waiting?" he asked, glancing at me through the mirror. The question didn't feel like idle conversation. It felt like a test I didn't know the rules to. I told him again I wasn't in a rush, and he exhaled, barely audible, as if that answer mattered more than it should have. The cab drifted into a quieter route, the common shortcut drivers used when traffic got heavy. I didn't think much of it until he slowed near an alleyway, leaned forward slightly, and scanned the rearview mirror with a stare so focused it made me shift in my seat. The clicking pen tapped twice, sharp, jittery beats that lined up with the slight tremor in his fingers. The SUV behind us rolled slower than usual. I saw its headlights swell in the mirror, cutting long white shapes across the ceiling of the cab. When the driver resumed speed, it followed at the same pace. A coincidence, maybe. Probably, but the tightness in the driver's jaw said he didn't believe in coincidences. He kept glancing at the SUV, catching glimpses of it between buildings. Each time its headlights flashed in the mirror, the clicking pen vibrated faintly, as though echoing the tension building inside the taxi. I tried to distract myself by staring out at the storefronts, sliding past pizza places, closing up a laundromat, humming with fluorescent light. A group of teenagers cutting across the sidewalk, laughing at something one of them shouted. Normal scenes, ordinary life. Yet the air inside the cab felt stiff and thin compared to everything outside. I caught the driver's phone screen lighting up in the cup holder. Instead of answering, he turned it face down so the glow disappeared. That gesture tightened something in me, tightening even more when the phone buzzed again and again until he finally killed the vibration completely. "You ever get the feeling someone's on your tail?" he asked, suddenly. Tone low and almost conversational, but there was a slight tremor underneath. I answered cautiously, saying I didn't think anyone was on ours. He didn't reply immediately. He just pressed his lips together and took another turn, his knuckles whitening again around the wheel. The pen clicked once when he shifted his hand. The route he chose wasn't the most direct. It veered through a stretch of road I didn't recognize. Buildings grew sparser, streets wider, shadows deeper. I considered asking him why he changed the path, but the words snagged in my throat. Something in his posture warned me against pushing too hard. The car behind us reappeared when I thought we'd lost it. Same headlights, same angle, same slow, hovering presence. The SUV kept just enough distance to avoid suspicion, yet close enough to feel intentional. My heartbeat thickened in my ears. The driver's breathing changed, shallow, irregular. His gaze darted to the mirrors with increasing urgency. I could feel the shift in his energy like static in the air. Then he asked me a question so quietly I almost missed it. "Do you trust your instincts?" It wasn't a normal question, not in the middle of a cab ride, not with a stranger. But the way he asked it made it sound like the answer mattered now immediately in ways I didn't yet understand. I swallowed and didn't answer. Maybe silence was safer. The clicking pen trembled against the visor as the car rolled to a stop at the next light. The driver inhaled sharply, a breath too tight to be natural. When he exhaled, it wasn't relief, it was preparation. Minnie Hook, the driver's eyes locked on the mirror as the SUV behind us inched forward, headlights flaring like a signal I wasn't meant to understand. I remembered the moment the ride shifted from uneasy to wrong, with a clarity that settled like grit behind my eyes. The street lamps dimmed as we moved into a quieter industrial stretch, the pavement broken and patched from years of trucks grinding over it. The city noise thinned out until only the hum of the engine and the steady rattle of loose metal somewhere under the chassis filled the space. The SUV behind us remained at the same careful distance, matching our every turn. The driver said nothing, but tension rippled through his shoulders in a way that tightened my own pulse. When we slowed near an intersection, he reached toward the console to adjust the radio. The movement seemed casual until something slipped out from a gap beneath the panel. A yellow sticky note, no bigger than his thumb, marked with a handwritten ref/, followed by a time written in thick strokes of fading ink. He snatched it up too quickly, like someone hiding a blade, and shoved it back beneath the plastic lip. But I had seen enough to know it wasn't random. Evidence wasn't supposed to appear in a taxi ride like that, and the way his fingers shook told me that sticky note mattered more than he wanted me to believe. People don't hide harmless things. I thought the words forming with a cold edge that startled me. The SUV's headlights swept across the side window again, washing over the driver's tense profile. I forced myself to breathe evenly, but every inhale felt sharp, like my chest didn't trust the air. The driver asked me for the third time if I lived alone. His voice had a hollow quality, like he wasn't asking for conversation, but for some kind of confirmation. I answered with a clipped no, even though it wasn't the whole truth. I didn't owe him the whole truth. His jaw tightened, and he nodded in a stiff, mechanical way that told me the answer didn't match whatever he hoped for. The sticky note flashed again in my mind, that stark ref/, paired with a time I couldn't forget. It didn't belong to the driver's world of shifts, fares, and tips. It felt like it belonged to something heavier, something coordinated. The road opened into a corridor of warehouses. Some loading docks still had lights on. Others were shuttered and silent. The SUV drifted closer, then farther, as if maintaining some internal rhythm I wasn't meant to read. The driver's knuckles pressed into the wheel with so much force the skin paled. His breathing had become clipped, broken up by quiet murmurs under his breath. I caught pieces of them, fragments like "not yet," and "wait for it," and the sharpness of those words sliced through what little calm I had left. I thought about asking him directly why he was acting like the night was collapsing around him, but every instinct in my body warned me to stay quiet. Silence felt safer. Silence felt like a shield. The sticky note returned to my thoughts again. The handwritten ref/as was too neat to be rushed, yet the time beside it was scrawled in a way that suggested panic, as if whoever wrote it wanted the information out quickly, but didn't have the luxury to make it clean. The driver's phone buzzed once, still face down, then again, then harder, rattling against the console. He ignored it, lips pressing together in a thin line. I watched him through the mirror, the dim industrial lights flickering over his eyes. He looked afraid, no more than afraid, cornered. He hit the blinker, turning down an even narrower street. For a moment, the SUV didn't follow. Relief sparked in my chest, fleeting but welcome. Then the SUV reappeared at the far end, sliding into the lane behind us with the precision of someone matching an exact coordinate. The dread in my stomach thickened. "Do you know that car?" I finally asked, unable to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard eyes, tracking the SUV in the mirror before he said, "Just hold on." That wasn't an answer. I leaned back, fingers tightening around the fabric of the seat. The sticky note flashed in my memory like a beacon refusing to fade. The driver slowed abruptly at a red light that flickered irregularly, threatening to cut out. The sticky note shifted where he'd stuffed it, and for a single second, I saw the edge of it curl upward, exposing the same inked ref slash. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Something about that number felt familiar. Not the digits themselves, but the structure, the way it looked like a tag assigned to something official, something logged, something recorded. The time scribbled beside it made my throat tighten. It was too specific to be random. I tried to place it, tried to think where I'd seen a number like that before. The driver's breath hitched, and he stared so hard into the mirror that I leaned away instinctively. The SUV rolled a few inches closer, headlights swelling into bright, blinding halos. Some nights the truth waits in the dark and stares right back at you. The thought struck me with enough force that I blinked. The light turned green, but the driver didn't move, not at first. He kept staring at the SUV like he needed to memorize something, like a signal was hidden in its idle rumble. When he finally hit the gas, it wasn't smooth. The cab lurched forward, tires scraping, engine growling harder than necessary. The SUV followed. I felt the panic clawing up my throat now. The sticky note felt branded into my memory. The shadows around us changed, shifting as we crossed another intersection. The SUV's headlights dwindled briefly as we passed between two tall warehouses, then flared unnaturally bright when we emerged into the open again. Then the driver said something that made every nerve in my body snap to attention. "We're almost out of time." Minnie hooked the light. Ahead of us flipped to red as multiple unmarked vehicles began turning onto the street, converging with eerie precision. The moment we rolled onto the wider avenue, everything around us brightened in a way that didn't feel like relief, but exposure, like stepping from shadow into the unblinking eye of something waiting. Storefronts stretched along both sides of the street, their signs reflecting harshly across the taxi windows. People walked along the sidewalks, some heading home, others drifting in and out of late-night shops, but none of them knew that the quiet pulse of danger sitting inside our cab was about to split open. The SUV behind us moved into view again, its headlights swelling through the rear window. The driver's fingers tightened around the wheel, and the reflection of the street's neon lights quivered along the visor, where the trembling glass sat in the cup holder left over from a previous passenger. It shook with each vibration of the engine, each nervous twitch of the driver's foot against the gas. When the first set of flashing lights appeared in the distance, the driver inhaled sharply, and I felt the tension in his breath even if I didn't understand it. More lights followed, 2, then 3, then more than I could count, swarming into the avenue with controlled urgency. Pedestrians paused, heads turned. The sidewalk shifted into low murmurs. I felt the world watching, closing in, even before the sirens wove themselves into one long, suffocating sound. The driver whispered something too soft to catch. I leaned forward slightly, trying to understand the pattern of lights, trying to make sense of why so many vehicles were responding at once. Then the unmarked sedan drifted into our lane, sliding ahead of us with a precision that felt almost rehearsed. An officer leaned out of the passenger window, signaling us to slow down. The trembling glass in the cup holder rattled harder as the cab rolled to a crawl. I heard someone on the sidewalk gasp. Others stepped backward, phones already rising. The driver's voice cracked as he muttered, "Not here, not like this." Before I could ask what he meant, a command blared through a loudspeaker behind us, distorted but unmistakably directed at the taxi. The driver froze. The trembling glass tapped against the plastic holder in a jittery rhythm that matched my pulse. Then I saw it, a tactical officer approaching with a tablet in hand, its screen glowing in sharp blue-white contrast against the night. He angled it toward another officer, and I caught a glimpse of the display through the windshield, a digital photo log labeled with an ID badge and a timestamp. Evidence number 2. The timestamp punched straight through my memory. It didn't match where I had been earlier that evening. It didn't match the driver's account either. The ID badge sat beneath the image, but the tiny preview photo was so overexposed it could have been me or someone like me or no one at all. They're not looking at us. They're looking through us. The thought slammed into me as one of the officers pointed at the tablet, and another angled his head toward the cab, giving it a nod that felt like confirmation of something I didn't understand. More officers formed a perimeter, their shadows stretching long across the pavement as the flashing lights cut through them like strips of cold fire. Bystanders gathered in clusters, phones held high, the glow of their screens flickering across their faces as they tried to capture every angle. The SUV behind us stopped abruptly, jarring the cab, just enough to make the trembling glass wobble dangerously on its rim before settling back down. The driver whispered, "Stay still," but his voice trembled harder than the glass. He reached toward the door lock, hesitating, then pulled his hand away when an officer shouted again. I watched the officer with the tablet step closer, angling the screen upward so the photo log's timestamp glowed against the cab's hood. Something about the way they positioned themselves made it clear they believed the data without question. The sidewalk spectators fell into silence, their murmurs replaced by a kind of collective breath-holding. The driver's chest moved erratically, each breath more uneven than the last. He tapped the steering wheel, a rapid, nervous rhythm that dragged my anxiety higher. The digital photo log's glow reflected in the windshield exactly where my face would be. The timestamp high-resolution, impossible to misread, stung like a blade against my sense of reality. That wasn't the time I'd been anywhere. That wasn't where I'd been at all. Yet the photo log didn't care. It existed as fact in someone else's world, even if it clashed with my own. "They think I'm someone I'm not," I whispered more to myself than to him. The driver's eyes darted to me wide and uncertain. He opened his mouth, maybe to confirm it, maybe to deny it, but another vehicle screeched into position before he could speak. Doors slammed, boots scattered. The trembling glass jumped violently as one officer slammed the hood of the cab to halt our movement entirely. The sound echoed across the avenue, silencing the crowd. Bystanders seemed trapped between fear and fascination, half ready to flee, yet tethered to the spectacle unfolding. One officer took aim not directly at us, but ready, and gestured for the driver to shut off the engine. He froze. Sweat slid down his temple, catching the neon reflections. "Turn it off," I whispered, and this time he obeyed. The engine cut, leaving a heavy quiet, filled only by muffled orders and the soft electronic beeping of the tablet as it updated. I saw the photo log change frames. Different angle, same. ID, same timestamp evidence, building itself in real time, reinforcing whatever narrative they already believed. One wrong timestamp can turn a life into a target. The thought hit sharper than the lights. Officers tightened their formation, blocking every escape line. The trembling glass tilted again, this time leaning dangerously towards spilling as the cab sank fully into stillness. The air grew thick enough to taste. Then the officer with the tablet stepped forward, his silhouette sharp and immovable, and pointed directly at the driver's window. Minnie Hook, the next command he delivered, made the driver flinch so hard the trembling glass finally tipped and shattered at his feet. They moved me fast, as if momentum itself were another tool in their control kit, guiding me through hallways that smelled of disinfectant and metal polish. Every step echoed the same authoritative rhythm, boots hitting the floor, as if to remind me I had no agency left, no say in the outcome. When they finally stopped, they placed me inside a narrow interview room with harsh overhead lighting that bleached every surface into cold, untrustworthy shades of white. The first thing I noticed wasn't the table or the camera in the ceiling corner or the stack of untouched folders. It was the slightly ajar door hanging open by an inch like an invitation or a warning. It wasn't enough to see anyone clearly outside, but it was enough to hear. Voices drifted through that sliver, muffled but unmistakably tense. They spoke in clipped phrases, urgency tightening their words. I couldn't distinguish full sentences, only fragments. Pattern doesn't match. Keep the time consistent. He didn't react the way we expected. I sat down, pretending not to listen, though every muscle in me leaned unconsciously toward that gap. The air conditioner rattled overhead, vibrating in irregular bursts that made my nerves crawl. The room smelled sterile, but beneath it lingered a faint scent of sweat and adrenaline, like every terrified person before me had left a trace behind. I kept replaying the driver's silence in my head. The way his voice vanished whenever that SUV appeared, the stiff angle of his neck, the quick darting eye flicks that had made the clicking pen tremble earlier. Evidence number 3 was already taking shape before they even brought someone in to spell it out. Behavioral evidence didn't rely on objects or timestamps. It lived in the body in breaths and glances and patterns, and the driver's pattern had been too precise to ignore. Eventually, the door opened a little wider, and an officer stepped inside. Not the hard-edged type who slammed the hood outside, not the one with the tablet, but someone younger carrying a clipboard, and a nervousness that softened his presence. He shut the door almost fully, leaving it only millimeters open, still slightly ajar, still letting voices leak through. "We're going to ask you a few questions," he said, sitting across from me. His tone tried for neutral, but couldn't hide the tension woven into its edges. He opened the clipboard and glanced down. "We need you to walk us through the driver's behavior. Carefully, detail by detail." "I don't know him," I said. "I hired a ride." "That's it." "We understand," he replied, but the crease in his forehead said otherwise. "Your account matters because it aligns or doesn't with what we've recorded." He paused, tapping his pen against the paper, creating a slow, rhythmic beat. "Then, what did you notice first?" "The clicking pen, the breath changes, the mirror glances." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal without implicating myself in a way I didn't understand. "He was tense," I said finally. The officer's pen froze over the page. Define tense. He watched the mirrors a lot, more than usual. He kept checking the car behind us every block or so. The officer nodded slowly. And the silence. The question cut deeper than I expected. I realized then that they already had a file on the driver's behavior. They weren't guessing, they were cross-checking. His silence wasn't normal, I admitted. Not for a driver. He spoke only when he had to. Eye movement. I clenched my hands together under the table. Fast. Precise. Like he was tracking something. The officer wrote something onto the clipboard. "We've coded that pattern," he said quietly, as pattern CF7. The time it began was 21:18. Pattern code. Time. Evidence number 3. The words hit harder than I expected. Pattern CF7, 21:18. I swallowed. "You tracked it?" "We track everything," he said. Voice steady but not unkind. His eye flicks matched an alert we were following. He shifted slightly in his chair. "Every time the vehicle behind you changed lanes, the driver reacted. Every time it stayed too long in your blind spot, he stiffened." "So you thought he was signaling," I said. "Potentially." He didn't deny it. He just let the word linger like something sharp left deliberately on the table. Through the slightly ajar door, I heard another voice, but the timing didn't sync with the earlier trigger check. "The sync again," another officer responded. "We did. Same mismatch. It doesn't align." The one across from me pretended not to hear, but the tension in his neck said he caught every word. "From your perspective," he said, "did he ever speak to anyone outside the cab?" "Number phone." It vibrated a lot. He never answered. "Did he look at it?" "Only the notifications." He didn't pick it up. The officer exhaled slowly, a controlled, measured sound. "That's part of the problem," he murmured almost to himself. His behavior predated the official call by several minutes. He stopped writing, looked at me. "Did he ever say anything unusual?" I hesitated. The truth felt stuck in my throat. He asked if anyone was waiting for me, twice. The officer stiffened. At what times I don't know, I said, frustrated. I wasn't tracking the clock. He scribbled on the clipboard. We have it at 21:20 and 21:22. The room felt colder suddenly. Those times don't match his behavioral pattern, he said, more to himself than me, or the surveillance. My pulse quickened. So what does that mean? He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, and he glanced toward the slightly ajar door as if checking whether anyone was listening. His voice dropped. It means someone's lying, and we don't know who yet. Truth breaks first at the seams, no one notices. The thought ran sharp through me as the officer stood abruptly gathering his clipboard. Stay here, he said. Do not touch the door. He left, closing it almost shut but not fully. Still ajar. Still listening. Mini-hook, a shadow passed behind the door, stopping just long enough to make it clear someone else had been listening the entire time. They moved me again this time into a different room, larger, colder, and lit with a narrow ceiling strip that cast a hard, precise line of white across the center of the metal table. The rest of the space sank into shadow. In the middle of the table lay a long, thin inspection knife used for opening evidence envelopes, its polished surface catching the light in a sharp streak. The knife glare cut across the room each time the overhead fixture flickered, slicing tight white reflections onto the walls like tracing lines of tension. I sat across from the chair they clearly wanted me to focus on. Everything in that room felt staged, arranged to press me into a corner without physically touching me. When the door opened, it wasn't the young officer from before. It was someone older with a tired precision in his movements, like he'd spent years peeling apart lies one layer at a time. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat, pulled a thin folder from under his arm, and opened it to a document stamped in red. Marcus, he said, tone flat. We're going to go through this slowly. I want you to pay attention to every detail. He slid the first sheet across the table. It was a SWAT call sheet. Clean, official, fit for courtroom evidence. But the second my eyes landed on the timestamp printed across the top, my pulse slammed into my ribs. The printed time read 21:08, followed by a unit designation, unit code R41. I blinked. That wasn't possible. That wasn't when anything had happened. And R41 wasn't the unit that responded to our street. The man watching me didn't blink. Take your time. I stared at the sheet again. Same numbers. Same impossible sequence. My breath hitched. I felt each second scraping down my throat as the truth twisted into something warped. Then the realization hit like a blow to the sternum. My breath stops at the timestamp that shouldn't exist. The investigator leaned forward. Tell me exactly where you were at 21:08. Not there, I said instantly. Not anywhere near the street you're thinking of. Then explain why this. He tapped the document. Says, the operation was triggered based on a sighting tied to your description at exactly that time. That's wrong. My voice cracked. It has to be. He didn't correct me, didn't scold. He just watched, eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring how the lie settled against the truth. But I wasn't lying. I knew I wasn't. And R41? He asked. Recognize that unit? No, I said. But something in my tone must have betrayed me, because he sat back with a faint, humorless exhale. Try again. I shook my head. I don't. I swear. The light flickered and the knife glare slid across the table, landing sharp and cold across my fingertips. The investigator's gaze followed it. Unit R41 wasn't supposed to be there, he said. They weren't even on active duty tonight. The words dropped into the room like lead. Then how? Exactly. He closed the folder halfway, letting it rest under his palm. Someone inserted this timestamp into the alert system, and someone pushed an inactive unit's code into the chain. The pieces collided in my head with increasing speed. The driver's fear, his mirror checking, the SUV trailing us, the sticky note with a time that didn't align with anything I'd seen. Someone set this up, I whispered. Someone framed the timeline itself. The investigator's eyes sharpened with interest, but he didn't offer agreement. He simply asked, "Why you?" Some lies don't hide people, they hunt them. The thought cut through me as sharply as the reflection on the knife. I rubbed my forehead, forcing myself to think past the adrenaline. I didn't do anything I said. I was just going home. That's what concerns me, he replied. Your behavior doesn't match someone guilty, but neither does it match someone unaware. I stared at him. What does that mean? He hesitated, which frightened me more than if he'd shouted. It means you reacted before some events occurred. Your body responded to things you technically shouldn't have known yet. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? He pulled another sheet from the folder, another timestamp, this one from body cam footage. It showed 21, 12 with the note, passenger displays anticipatory reaction. I wasn't reacting, I said. I was scared of the driver. We know he murmured. But the question is, why was the driver scared before the triggers even fired? That stunned me. You're saying his behavior started before any official alert minutes before, he said, which means he was responding to something else entirely. My pulse thudded. The echo motif still lingered, tightening my throat. But then why did your team surround us? He closed the folder. Because the doctored timestamp told us to. The room felt too small, the air too sharp. Someone manipulated your system to send you after the wrong people. Or the right ones, he said quietly, depending on what they wanted. Outside the room, a door slammed. Voices rose urgent. The investigator didn't flinch. He only looked toward the sound once before rising. We're not done, he said. Don't touch anything. The knife glare burned briefly across the table as the ceiling light flickered again. He stepped out. The door shut behind him. Mini-hook a second later, the lights above me cut out completely, leaving only the knife's thin reflection glowing in the dark like a warning. The power returned in a staggered flicker, but the brief darkness had already crawled under my skin by the time the light steadied, casting harsh angles across the metal table again. I sat frozen for a moment, waiting for someone to reappear, half expecting the knife from earlier to shine somewhere in the shadows. But instead, the door opened, and Officer Reyes stepped inside with a quiet, almost apologetic expression. He closed the door behind him, not fully leaving it cracked the width of 2 fingers, and the thin sliver of hallway light formed a stripe across the wall like a silent warning. I watched him move toward the table. His presence had none of the sharp aggression some of the others carried. He felt like someone who didn't quite match the rhythm of the operation, but was forced into it anyway. As he sat, I noticed the scratch mark gouged into the metal surface near his elbow, a jagged indentation that looked like someone had dragged a key or a piece of equipment down its length in frustration, leaving an ugly scar. That mark became impossible not to see. It mirrored the feeling inside my chest. Something dragged violently, leaving damage that couldn't be smoothed back into place. Marcus Reyes said softly, hands resting open on the table. I need to clarify a few things with you. His tone, unlike the others, didn't sound rehearsed. He glanced at the scratch mark once, almost as if it grounded him. I know you've already answered a lot tonight, but I need your account matched against the log from the street. Why I asked voice tight? Because he said pulling out a small recorder, your reactions don't line up with the triggers we had, and the triggers don't line up with the timeline we were given. He clicked on the recorder. The small red light blinked with metronome precision. Start with the moment the convoy approached, he said. Tell me exactly what you saw. I told him everything carefully, quietly, how the lights seemed to converge from all angles, how the SUV behind us stayed too steady, how the driver whispered warnings that made no sense. Reyes listened intently, his eyes narrowing at certain details. When I finished, he inhaled slowly as if bracing himself. I need to give you something now, he said, and it won't make you feel better. He lifted a folded sheet of paper from his pocket, a printed transcript. This is the witness statement I filed, evidence number 5. I need you to read one line aloud. He pointed to the relevant sentence. My throat tightened as I leaned forward, the scratch mark sliding under my wrist. I read the line quietly. Subject appeared aware before alert was issued. It didn't feel like my voice saying it. Now look at the reference. He tapped the margin. There it was, Unit Ref T-19. But that's not who responded, I whispered. Reyes shook his head. No, it's not. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, even though the recorder kept blinking. That's why I'm here. Someone used my statement to justify your detainment before we even arrived. His jaw tightened, but that phrase, subject appeared aware before alert was issued, that wasn't pulled from anything I said. I felt the floor inside me tilt. You're saying your statement was altered. I'm saying someone used my name to authenticate data I never entered. He sat back, exhaling sharply. The only reason I saw it at all was because I requested the chain of custody report. They acted like it didn't matter. Truth doesn't vanish. People bury it alive. The thought hit me as Reyes rubbed his temples with both hands. The operation was already in motion when we got the final green light, he said. The orders from above were unusual, too fast, too rigid, like they were following instructions from someone outside the chain. Then why tell me, I asked, voice trembling. Why not tell your own team? Because some of my team is the problem, Reyes said quietly, and some of them don't even know they're part of it. The scratch mark seemed deeper now, like it absorbed the weight of his confession. What about the timestamp, I asked. The call sheet, I've seen it. He murmured, It's wrong. Completely wrong. And whatever inserted it into the system used a clearance higher than mine. Then he leaned forward with a heaviness that made the room shrink around us. Marcus, you weren't supposed to be the target. The words punched the air out of me. Then who was? Reyes swallowed. Someone connected to your route, possibly connected to the driver, possibly connected to your workplace. My breath caught. What does my workplace have to do with this? Reyes hesitated. That hesitation terrified me more than anything else that night. There was a cross alert filed 3 days ago, he said. A report flagged under your name, a report, a complaint, something administrative. But it triggered a secondary screening protocol. Someone pushed that protocol to escalate. My skin prickled. What complaint? Reyes's eyes flicked toward the scratch mark again, as if searching for an anchor. You'll see soon, he whispered. They've been withholding it until the lead investigator returns. A muffled voice called Reyes's name from the hallway. He stiffened. Another voice, sharper, impatient, followed. I have to go, he said, almost in a whisper. But listen carefully. If anyone else asks you about the driver, especially about his behavior, give them nothing extra, nothing they can twist. Reyes, I said, leaning toward him. Am I safe here? His silence was the worst answer imaginable. He stood, clicked off the recorder, and slid it into his pocket. Whatever happens next, he said quietly, happens fast. And then before he turned to leave, he added the final piece of evidence number 5, the verbal fragment that would lock itself into my memory forever. Unit T-19 was never meant to engage that street. The door opened wider as someone called him again. He stepped out, left the door cracked, left the scratch mark gleaming under the flickering light. Minnie Hook, a shadow, moved past the doorway and stopped as if listening before the door began slowly pushing open on its own. They didn't drag me this time. They walked me 2 officers, neither speaking each, keeping just enough distance to pretend I wasn't being escorted like a liability. The halls grew quieter as we moved deeper into the facility lights, dimming with every corner. The air shifted too, turning colder, like the building had a way of warning people when they were getting close to something they weren't supposed to see. When they brought me into the next room, I noticed it immediately. The misaligned photo frame hanging crooked on the wall, its left corner higher than the right, by just enough to feel intentional, like someone bumped into it during an argument and no one bothered to straighten it afterward. That frame set the tone. Nothing here was aligned. Nothing here was honest. They seated me at a table on the far side of the room, away from the door. The overhead light buzzed with a faint electrical stutter, throwing harsh shadows on the edges of the room. A single folder sat on the table, sealed with a thick adhesive strip. Its edges crimped like whoever prepared it didn't want it touched without authorization. The older investigator, the one with the precision in his movements and the exhaustion behind his eyes, entered. He didn't carry the same knife-like presence as before, but something about him felt heavier, like he had learned something during his absence that neither of us would like. He sat across from me, resting one hand lightly on the folder. Before we talk, he said, I need you to understand that this isn't the part where things get easier. He pushed the folder toward me. Open it. My pulse jumped. What is it? Your file. I don't have a file. Everyone has a file, he said. Most people just never see what's inside. My hands hesitated at the adhesive seal. It tore with a gritty sound when I pulled it apart. Inside lay a single document folded in thirds. HR letterhead, workplace crest. I felt my breath hitch. This was evidence number 6. I unfolded it slowly and my stomach dropped when I saw the header, Formal Warning, Ref SAR WH317B date, code 0219XX, ref/ date code, signed by someone I recognized. Jedson Mark, my co-worker, the guy who always stood too close during inventory checks, who complained when people moved his crates, who once told me I didn't follow protocols like the rest of them. I read the first line and my skin prickled. Employee has displayed irregular behavior, including unexplained absences during shift-adjacent hours. That wasn't true. That wasn't true at all. False records cut deeper than any weapon. The thought hit so sharply, I almost said it aloud. This is wrong, I said, voice tight. I've never keep reading. My eyes moved down the page, attempted to access restricted sections without authorization. No. Displayed agitation when approached regarding inventory discrepancies. No. Raised suspicion from colleague J. Mark regarding off-site activities. My pulse slammed once hard. I looked up. Off-site activities. What activities? The investigator kept his hands folded. You tell me. I don't do anything off-site, I snapped. I go home, I sleep, I work. That's it. He watched me with a tiring clarity, as if trying to peel the truth from my bones. Marcus, this letter triggered your screening protocol. Triggered what a cross-agency autoflag. Then someone with access, elevated it to a threat-level alert. I stared at the page. The letters blurred. Jedson, I whispered. He wrote this. Or someone wrote it under his name, the investigator said. We don't know yet. But why would he? Because someone needed a starting point, a reason to pull you into a larger chain. I felt the room tilt. The misaligned photo frame on the wall wavered in my peripheral vision. This isn't a misunderstanding, then, I said hollowly. Someone pushed this on purpose. Yes. He didn't soften it. Someone wanted your name in the pipeline. My throat tightened. But why me? He leaned forward. The buzzing light flickered once, dragging the knife-like glare across his cheek. That's what we're trying to understand. But the warning letter was filed 3 days ago, and you didn't contest it. Because I never saw it. He nodded slowly. HR never delivered it. Someone intercepted it. Who, maybe Jedson? Maybe not. He tapped the page. This date code, 0219XX, was altered. Look at the ink. I did. The date code was slightly darker than the rest of the text. 2 entries were overwritten, he said. Changed to match the timing of another alert. My skin crawled. What other alert? He hesitated again. The one involving your taxi driver. The frame on the wall seemed to tilt another inch, though I knew it hadn't moved. The driver. There are inconsistencies in his shifts, his routes, his logs. He paused. And his connection to your workplace. My heart dropped. The silence between us thickened. What connection? I whispered. Tell me. He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the door burst open so hard it hit the wall. Another officer stepped inside, breath shallow, eyes narrowed. We need him, the officer said, pointing at me. The investigator stood immediately. I'm in the middle of... Now, the officer snapped. New information just came in. The investigator's jaw worked, but he stepped aside. My pulse raced. What information? I asked. The officer didn't answer. He only motioned for me to stand. I rose slowly, the folder still open in front of me, the damning warning letter staring up like an accusation carved into paper. The misaligned photo frame loomed overhead, its crooked angle suddenly feeling like a prophecy. Minnie Hook, as they pulled me toward the hallway, an officer whispered just loud enough for me to hear, Your coworker is in custody, and he's not denying anything. They brought me into a smaller room, this time not an interrogation space exactly, but something between a storage alcove and an overflow office. The lighting was harsher here, a single bar of fluorescence buzzing overhead with an uneven hum that vibrated in my teeth. A long metal cabinet lined one wall, and in the middle of the room sat a narrow table topped with a cold countertop, smooth stainless steel, and so chilled it felt like touching the inside of a freezer. When they directed me to sit, the cold struck through my skin like a warning. I kept my hands resting on its edge, trying to steady myself, while my pulse kept slipping out of sync with my thoughts. The investigator from earlier appeared a moment later. He looked older than he had an hour ago, as if the weight of whatever he'd learned had settled into the lines around his eyes. He placed a folder on the cold surface with a soft metallic thud, then stood there for a long moment before finally opening it. He didn't look at me when he spoke. We reviewed the footage again. His voice was slow, controlled, as if each word had to pass through a filter before reaching me. He slid a printed image across the countertop. The paper made a faint scraping sound against the metal. My breath snagged when I saw it, a grainy CCTV still frame time-stamped and labeled, Mar 12, time 2108, the same impossible timestamp that had already torn holes through the narrative. The figure in the frame stood near a loading area entrance, hooded, shoulders hunched. The streetlight had cast a long shadow that swallowed half of him, enough to resemble me, enough to confuse anyone verifying fast, but not enough to be definitive. I stared at it, heart pounding against my ribs. "That's not me," I said quietly. "It isn't." "Maybe not," the investigator murmured. "But the system thinks it is, and someone wants the system to think it is." He tapped the edge of the photo. "This location is nowhere near where your driver picked you up. And this figure showed up on footage exactly at the mismatched timestamp 2108, same minute as the corrupted call sheet. And the unit code, I asked. R41. He nodded, matched to an inactive unit. Someone dragged their number into the alert system to justify the rapid response. I gripped the cold countertop, letting the metal sting into my palms. The cold was grounding even when everything else felt like it was collapsing in on itself. "What location is this?" I asked. He hesitated. "Near your workplace." My stomach dropped, but I wasn't there. "I believe you," he said, and this time it sounded like he meant it. "But someone needed you there, or needed you to appear there on paper, on camera, in data." He slid another photo across the countertop. Same place, a different angle, same hooded figure. My throat tightened. The cold surface under my hands made me feel anchored barely. "Whoever that is," I whispered, "they knew exactly how to move." "Yes, and they knew where every camera was," he replied. Camera 12 barely captures anything beyond that shadow, but camera 14 would have gotten a clearer shot. "Do you have that?" He shook his head once sharply. Camera 14 was offline during the critical minute. Systems fail when truth threatens whoever built them. The thought flickered across my mind like a blade catching light. "Someone planned this," I said. "Detailed, layered, coordinated." "Yes." His voice tightened. "And they started 3 days ago when the HR warning letter was filed." I shook my head. "The letter was false." "Exactly." His jaw clenched. "Which is why I need you to tell me who would benefit from this." Anger heated at the base of my throat. "Jedson wrote the letter. Or someone wrote it under his name," he reminded. "But we found something in the warehouse logs that you need to see." He pulled out a final sheet, placing it gently on the cold countertop. The contrast between the thin paper and the metal beneath it made my fingertips prick. The sheet displayed route logs from the past month, access patterns, employee keycard pings, exit timestamps. "Look here," he said, pointing at an entry. "Entry Hale M2056. "That's not me," I said instantly. "I wasn't there. I know, but your badge was." My heart hammered. "My badge. How we think someone cloned it." My skin prickled. "Then show me the camera for that entry." The investigator's jaw tensed. "There isn't one. Why not?" He stared at me. Expression grim, exhausted, and sharp. "Because that camera was taken offline the same day the HR letter was filed." The cold countertop pressed into my skin like ice. "So someone cloned my badge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Filed a fake complaint, altered the date code, inserted a false timestamp, deployed an inactive unit code, positioned someone who looked like me at the warehouse entrance, and tampered with camera access and surveillance verification. He finished. Yes. I leaned forward, pulse pounding in my ears. But why? He didn't answer. Not immediately. His silence stretched long enough that the fluorescent light flickered again, casting a thin, trembling reflection across the cold surface. He finally exhaled, voice barely audible. We don't know, but we're close to finding out. Before I could speak, the door burst open. A different officer stepped in, face pale, breath fast. We need to move him. Now. The investigator stiffened. Why Jedson's statement changed, the officer said. He admitted to lying about the HR letter. My chest tightened. And the officer swallowed hard. And he said he wasn't the only one involved. Who else, the investigator demanded. The officer flicked a glance at me, nervous, uncertain. He said, the driver wasn't your target. I felt the room tilt. Then who was? The officer's throat bobbed. You. Mini-hook, before anyone could speak again, the cold countertop vibrated as an alarm blared through the facility, and the lights snapped off. The alarm had cut through the hallway like a blade, but when the lights finally returned, they came back dimmer than before, flickering in staggered pulses that made every shadow stretch unnaturally long. They moved me again, not with urgency this time, but with a tense, brittle caution, as if the wrong movement might fracture whatever truth they were circling. The room they pushed me into wasn't an interrogation space or a holding area. It looked like a storage break room converted on the fly. A humming industrial refrigerator sat against the far wall, its motor thrumming in an uneven cycle. The low fridge hum filled the room, vibrating faintly under my shoes, a dull, persistent reminder that even something mundane could turn threatening in the wrong context. The investigator entered behind me, closing the door with a firm, decisive click. The humming deepened, rattling slightly at the edges, as if the machine felt the tension too. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he stood with his back to me, shoulders stiff, breath shallow. When he finally turned, he had a thick folder in his hand, thicker than any I'd seen tonight, sealed with a red strap and marked with multiple clearance levels. He set it on the table. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then, this is where everything breaks open. His voice carried a weight that made my stomach drop. He unfastened the strap and opened the folder. Inside was a document printed on heavy stock paper, most of the text blacked out. Even at a glance, I recognized the formatting classified field documentation. Evidence number 8. Read this, he said, sliding it toward me. My fingers hovered before touching the paper. The fridge hum deepened, filling the silence as I lowered my eyes to the visible lines. The first unredacted section hit me like a punch. Field Log Unit /R41 Action Code S95 Delta. My breath went thin. R41, the inactive unit, the ghost team. This can't be real, I whispered. It is, he said. And it's worse than you think. I scanned the next section. It referenced an operation initiated based on predictive threat analysis and validated by cross-agency flag. My chest tightened. Predictive threat. Cross-agency. This is about me, I said quietly. He nodded once. Yes. Someone forced your name into a predictive model. Then someone else, possibly the same person, inserted the false HR warning, tampered with surveillance, cloned your badge, and triggered the alert protocol. The fridge hum flickered into a higher pitch. It crawled under my skin. Who authorized this? I asked. He tapped the action code line. That code, S95 Delta, means the operation was triggered automatically. System override. Someone used top-level access to push the event into motion without manual review. I stared at him. Someone inside, or someone using credentials belonging to someone inside? He leaned forward. The timestamp mismatch wasn't the only error. The call sheet was altered twice, once before the operation, once during. My pulse quickened. During? He nodded. The system was updated in real time. Someone kept feeding it new information while we were already en route. Invisible hands can steer an entire night into disaster. The thought sliced across my mind with cold precision. So someone wanted your team looking for me. I said slowly, even while knowing the data didn't match. Yes. His eyes hardened. Which means they wanted you isolated, controlled, and monitored. But why? I whispered. What did I do? That's the part we're still trying to uncover. He pointed to another line in the log, one I hadn't fully processed yet. Target status, active risk, pending confirmation. That's you, he said. Someone labeled you as an active risk, without evidence, without cause. I stared at the line until the words blurred. That's not possible. It shouldn't be, he said. But when the system accepts a false input, everything built on top collapses. The fridge hum stuttered, then steadied. My hands felt numb. Does the log say who entered the alert? He shook his head. That part is redacted, fully, which means whoever did it had clearance above mine, above yours. My voice cracked. Who has that level? His silence was answer enough. The hum deepened again, vibrating the metal table legs. You said this operation wasn't supposed to target me, I murmured. Correct. Then who was it supposed to target? He closed the folder. Originally, the driver. My stomach lurched. But the system switched it to me. Yes. Why? He studied me for a long moment, because the driver had been under observation for weeks. Low priority. No immediate threat. So the system changed the target. No, he said quietly. Someone changed the target. Someone rewrote the night to point everything at me. He nodded slowly. Yes. My pulse wouldn't settle. But why would anyone? A fist pounded the door. Hard. Both of us flinched. Before the investigator could stand, the door burst open and an officer rushed in breathless. They breached the main queue, he said. Someone accessed the live system. The investigator stiffened. Who, we don't know, but they're rewriting the classification logs. My chest tightened. Rewriting what? The officer swallowed. Your status. The fridge hum deepened until it shook the shelves. To what I asked, voice barely sound. The officer hesitated. To confirmed. The investigator spun toward him. That's impossible. There's no evidence. They don't need evidence, the officer said. They have the clearance. Who the investigator demanded. The officer worked his jaw, dread tightening his features. The system logged the access under one name. He looked at me. Sergeant Dana Kroll. The room froze. Kroll. The team lead from the raid. She authorized the update, the officer said. She marked you as confirmed active risk. My mouth went dry. Why? The officer's voice shook. Because she just submitted a statement claiming she saw you earlier in the night. The investigator went pale. That's a lie. It doesn't matter, the officer whispered. The system already accepted it. Mini hook. Before I could react, the investigator grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet, whispering urgently, Kroll is coming here, and she's not coming to talk. They rushed me through a back corridor, the investigator gripping my arm with a force that told me fear had replaced protocol. His breath came sharp and fast, each exhale cutting through the silence like it was trying to outrun something behind us. The hallway lights flickered again, casting stuttering shadows along the concrete walls as we pushed into a larger administrative wing. The moment we entered, everything felt different, quieter, heavier, like the building itself was bracing for impact. Officers stood clustered at one end of the room, their voices low and strained. In the center sat a long table with 3 chairs on each side, lit by a single overhead lamp that hung too low, casting a tight circle of exposure across the table's surface. And there, sitting with his shoulders slumped, wrists trembling slightly as he clasped his hands together, was Jedson. My coworker. The man whose handwriting had marked the warning letter that detonated my night. He didn't look up at first. Not until the investigator cleared his throat. Then Jedson raised his eyes, and something about the way he looked at me, fear, guilt, regret, tangled in one expression, knocked the breath out of my chest. On the table in front of him lay a crumpled note edges, bent ink smudged, as if it had been gripped and twisted in a moment of panic. The investigator nodded toward the empty chair across from him. "Sit," he said. "We're going to finish this." My pulse hammered. My palms felt slick. I lowered myself into the seat, the metal legs scraping the floor with a sound that made Jedson flinch. Reyes stood nearby, jaw clenched, arms folded tight across his chest. This wasn't a formal interrogation. It was a collision one I'd been pushed toward since the night began. Jedson, the investigator, said, voice low, "Tell him what you told us." Jedson swallowed hard. His voice, when it came, cracked at the edges. "I filed the complaint." The words landed like blows. I stared at him. Why? His breath shuddered. Because someone told me to. Who? A beat. He looked down at the crumpled note fingers twitching toward it. "I don't know their name." Rage flashed hot and blinding behind my ribs. "You wrote a formal accusation about me based on a message from someone you couldn't identify." He jerked his head up. "It wasn't just a message. It was a warning. Said you were involved in something dangerous. Said if I didn't file it, it would come back on me." Fear in weak hands becomes a weapon pointed at the wrong person. The thought tore through me before I could stop it. "You could have talked to me," I said. "Asked me. Anything." Jedson's shoulders curled inward, shrinking. "I believed them," he whispered. "They knew things about the warehouse, things only management should know. They said you were sneaking out during shifts." "I wasn't." His voice cracked again. "I know that now." The investigator lifted the crumpled note and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a short message written in sharp block letters. "File the report. Reef Fast WH 317B. Do not ask questions." The bottom corner bore a smeared date code, the same date code used on the HR letter. The investigator set it down in front of me. "We ran handwriting analysis," he said. "It doesn't match Jedson's. It matches another person inside this building." My heart dropped. "Who?" Before he could answer, Reyes stepped closer, jaw tight. "Kroll," he said. Her handwriting, her pressure pattern, her signatures matched the block lettering style. She fed the warning, she fed the system, she triggered the chain. My breath faltered. The room tilted in a slow, nauseating spin. "But why target me?" Reyes exchanged a look with the investigator, both men bracing themselves. "Because the investigator said your badge was cloned to cover another entry. Someone used your name as a smokescreen for a breach at the warehouse 3 days ago." My stomach twisted. "The breach, yes. Someone accessed restricted materials. Someone used a clone of your badge to get inside. The complaint was designed to justify watching you, and if anything went wrong, I'd take the fall," I finished. Reyes nodded. "Exactly." Jedson started shaking. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know." When Kroll approached me, she sounded so damn certain. She said your behavior had to be logged or the warehouse would be liable. She made it sound like I was protecting the company. "She played you," I said, voice flat. "She played all of us." The investigator folded his arms. We also found that Kroll rerouted the first call sheet. She inserted the timestamp 2108 using a clearance level tied to her old credentials that should have been deactivated months ago. Reyes's expression hardened. She manipulated the system from the inside. Jedson blinked, tears beginning to gather. She said if I didn't write it, she'd find someone who would. I leaned forward. "Why did she want me targeted?" Jedson shook his head. "I don't know. She never said your name. Only your badge number." The investigator tapped the crumpled note again. "There's something else." He slid a second sheet forward, another internal log. The date code matched the warehouse breach. Kroll accessed your personnel file the same day your badge was cloned. My blood turned cold. "She planned this." "Yes," Reyes said. "She planned everything." A heavy silence settled over the room. The fridge hum deepened, vibrating the air like a quiet warning. Something in me tightened, then loosened as if my breath wanted to reclaim space but wasn't ready yet. The beginnings of that resolve stirred, but didn't fully rise. The investigator stood. Kroll is the center of this. She orchestrated the misidentification, the escalation, the unit, override the timestamp alteration, and the operation Reyes finished. All of it. Jedson wiped his eyes, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Marcus." I stared at him. at the note, at everything caving in and everything aligning at once. The truth was finally standing upright in the room, no longer hiding in mismatched times and manipulated systems. The investigator stepped toward the door. "We have enough to stop her," he said. "We're moving now." But the door swung open before he could reach it. An officer rushed in, face pale, breathless. "It's too late," he said. "She's already in the building. Minnie Hook." His voice dropped to a tremor. "And she's coming here." Banned an eye. Everything moves at once. The hallway outside erupts into a collision of orders, boots, and radios barking fractured updates that barely hold their shape. I feel the shift in the air before anyone reaches me, the way tension tightens like a wire pulled to snapping point. The investigator grabs my arm again, but this time there's no urgency, only necessity. We move through the administrative wing as lights flicker overhead, each pulse illuminating the panic settling into the building's bones. I hear Reyes behind us, his steps fast but quiet, the kind of movement someone makes when they know the danger isn't loud. It's precise. We push through a doorway and emerge into a service hallway where the ceiling lights stabilize just long enough to cast a thin, sharp reflection along the metal security door ahead. A knife glare reflection cuts across it, thin as a breath, bright as a warning. The investigator stops abruptly. "She's close," he says. His voice is lower now, controlled in a way that scares me more than panic would. Reyes steps forward, checking the corner, before signaling us to move. My heartbeat rattles in my chest. Every instinct screams at me to run, but the truth is tightening around the night now, pulling it into a shape that finally makes sense, or almost does. We enter a narrow security vestibule with a row of lockers on one side and a long observation window overlooking the holding bay on the other. The building is alive with motion officers, rushing, shouting, trying to lock down sections faster than the threat moves. Kroll has become the center of gravity in a storm no one saw coming. A radio crackles behind us. Sighted on South Stairwell, moving fast. She's avoiding cameras, lock access points. Reyes exhales sharply. Damn it! She knows every blind spot in this place. The investigator pulls me closer to the wall, out of sight of the window. "Marcus," he says quietly, "she didn't start this tonight. She's been building towards something. You were just the last piece." Why me? My voice shakes, but the question finally feels like it belongs. He meets my eyes. "Because your badge was easy to clone. Your schedule was predictable. And you were alone that night at the warehouse." A tremor passes through me. I didn't go inside. I know, he says. But the system doesn't, and she made sure of that. Footsteps thunder down the hallway. Officers rush past us without stopping, their faces drawn tight with fear, disguised as focus. Reyes peers out the small window in the security door. "We have to move," he mutters. "If she gets to the main floor, she'll disappear into any responding unit." "She'll come for him first," the investigator says, nodding toward me. "She needs to finish the narrative. Some people don't chase truth. They chase whichever lie keeps them powerful." The thought hits hard, clean, certain. For a moment, silence returns to the hallway. Then 3 sharp clangs echo from the far end, followed by the low hum of a badge scanner being overridden. Reyes stiffens. She's bypassing locks. I try to steady my breathing, but the room feels thinner, the air tight and sharp. Then the investigator grips my shoulder, grounding me. "Look at me," he says. "Tonight wasn't an accident. You were never the threat they needed you to look like one. Why to bury the real breach? A beat. To bury her tracks." The building hums, lights flicker, and from behind the metal security door, I hear a sound like someone dragging a boot across concrete. Slow, deliberate. Reyes pulls his sidearm. The investigator positions himself slightly ahead of me. My heartbeat spikes, but this time the fear doesn't scatter my thoughts. It sharpens them. The steps on the other side of the door stop. No breathing, no movement. Just silence, thick enough to press into my ears. Then metal scrapes. The door handle shifts. Reyes raises his weapon. The investigator lifts a hand, hesitant. Wait. A shadow moves across the frosted glass. Then another. Officers, not Kroll. The door bursts open and a tactical team floods in, weapons raised, breaths harsh. "Clear," one of them shouts. The investigator steps forward. "Where is she, North Exit?" the team leader says. "She's running." Reyes curses under his breath. "Of course she is." The team leader looks at me confused. "Is this the civilian she tagged?" "Yes," the investigator says. "And she falsified everything to do it." The team leader stiffens, then nods. "We'll intercept." They rush out. The hallway empties. The sudden quiet feels unnatural. Reyes holsters his weapon slowly. The investigator sits on a bench near the lockers, exhaling for the first time in what feels like hours. I stand there in the middle of the room, listening to the distant shouts echo across the building, trying to understand whether this moment is safety or simply another pause before the next hit. The fridge hum from earlier isn't here, but its memory still vibrates in my chest. Everything is still coming into place. Every lie is being peeled back. And something inside me, the part that's been clenched since the first whisper in the taxi, loosens just enough that I can feel the shift. The beginning of something like breath. Not relief, not yet, but the start of reclaiming something taken. My breath returns when the truth finally lands. The sentence rises through me quiet, but certain, pulling my thoughts together with an anchor I didn't know I needed. Officers shout again in the distance, doors slam, radios crackle. The investigator stands and walks toward me. His voice carries a gravity that feels final. "It's over, Marcus," he says. "Not all of it," I reply. "But enough." He nods. Reyes steps beside him. "We'll finish the rest," he promises. They guide me toward the exit tunnel that leads to the outside. The night air leaks in from the far end, cool, open reel. When we step through the final doorway, the city greets me with low streetlights and the soft rush of passing cars. My lungs expand more fully than they have all night. I take one last glance at the building behind us, at the shadowed windows, and the reflection of a thin, fading line of light across a metal frame. The last remnants of the knife glare reflection that followed me through every truth I didn't want and every truth I needed. Mini hook final landing. I step into the night, breath steady, at last, knowing the story isn't finished, only revealed.